So I'm Katrina Paglierani. I forget that not everybody knows me. I'm the founder and consultant at ExposeYourSaaS. And today I have with me Bonnie Tender, who is the founder and CEO of Raven Intel. I'll let her tell a little bit more about herself after I'm done with these initial introductions. Jacqueline Kuhn is the executive vice president of HRchitect, and then Brenda Laughlin, who's the co-founder and managing partner of Enavrio. So I'll let you three gals give a quick intro of who you are and what you do, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So Bonnie, take it off.
Hi, well, good morning. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Raven Intel. What we do is we're a peer review site for the integrators of enterprise software. So similar to Glassdoor, but we rate professional services firms that do work around enterprise software. I have a background in the HR tech industry. I've been in it for really my entire career, so 25 years, and excited to talk about integrations because certainly those are a huge pain point during implementation, and we have a lot to share today.
Jacqueline?
Hi, everyone. Jacqueline Kuhn with HRchitect. We are a full-service HCM technology consulting firm. We help our clients basically select and implement HCM technology. We've been in business for over 25 years and are 100% vendor neutral. I've been around the block in HR tech since before it was HR tech, so I have some insights as well on what it's like to be on the implementation side when you're looking at integrations.
And Brenda.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Brenda Laughlin. I'm the co-founder of Enavrio. We are an HR tech marketplace, services marketplace. We work with clients to provide all sorts of freelance, independent experts to help augment whatever kind of projects you're working on. We work with vendors to provide functional and domain support. We've done quite a bit of work when we talk about integrations and really supporting vendors, supporting clients in the integration area. I started my career as an HR practitioner and then spent half of it as an HR practitioner, half of it in more of the consulting HR tech space, and most recently have jumped into also the data privacy, HR data privacy area.
Okay. So as you see, we have some great women here with some great experience behind them and very valuable insights into what we're going to talk about today, which is really, we're here to help you know what you need to ask, what you need to consider when you're looking at integration partners and solutions. So the first one is, what type of integrations do they offer? And what does that mean when you get the answer? Do you understand the answer? What other questions do you need to ask? So I guess I'll start with Bonnie. I know that we spoke the other day and you had some ideas about what a standard integration could mean.
Right. Yes. And I think, this idea of quote unquote standard integration is a sticky wicket because there's no such thing as standard. And I think, that's where there's assumptions made either on the client part or the vendor side. That's when things, I think, become problematic. So, by the term the definition of integration, you really need to understand what does that mean? Is it a true API? And what fields are passing back and forth between the systems? Is it a file feed? I mean, integration can mean so many different things. And so I think the first order of business is really defining what is meant by an integration and getting really specific about, what are the fields passed back and forth between two systems.
Do you think, and this is to all three of you, or do you think that there's one that is more valuable than the other, or does it depend on the circumstances? Whether it's API or file-based or what have you.
I think it depends on what we're trying to accomplish, because sometimes I've seen a lot of complexity built into integrations when it's really not necessary. So staying simple is so valuable. So really, when you're defining what is the standard integration, keeping it simple I found that to be so valuable to clients. So sometimes, to answer your question, sometimes file feed is the best answer in some cases, especially if you're only like dating the data once a year.
Right.
Right? Like, what's
Right.
the use of having a fancy API?
Right. Just because you can move the data doesn't mean you should move it all, right?
You should move it. Yep.
Jacqueline, do you have any insight or anything on that?
Yeah, I just think, and it also depends on your vendors and what it takes to maintain whatever you're building. Because like Brenda said, you need to keep it simple and you need to keep it maintainable and supportable. That's, I think, what we see as when clients go off the rails is they make things so much more complicated that when it comes time to support it 6 months, a year, 18 months down the road, they can't. And then you get that client satisfaction is gone, and then they start looking to move to another vendor, and then they start going through that whole gerbil wheel all over again.
Right. Okay, I'm going to move on to this one here, the next one. What is their support model and why is that important?
Okay, I want to take that one.
Okay.
As someone who helps folks buy software, this is so important because like the term standard, everybody assumes that standard means the vendor is going to support it no matter what. And that's why this is super important to understand what you as a vendor are going to be responsible for, what your vendor partners, right? I mean, if you're building partnerships from one vendor to another, what are you going to do? What is your other vendor going to do? And what is the customer responsible for? Because your customer is going to look to you for the solution of who's responsible for what. And then how long is it going to take to do that? We had a client who had to integrate their new HRMS to a 401k vendor, and the 401k vendor said $10,000 in 6 months. That would kill an implementation, right? So when you're looking to partner with other vendors, when you're looking to partner and build integrations, you really need to understand how that's going to work, who's going to do what are you responsible for the client, and how long is it going to take to build those?
Yeah, and I would add on that, as just met with a vendor yesterday with one of the later speakers today to talk about them building connectors to various tools. And one of the important things is that you make sure that when you're talking to, if you're a HR tech vendor with a solution and you're looking for somebody that's going to help you from an integration standpoint, how do they manage their support? How do they make changes to what they've built when one side of the integration makes an update to theirs? And then how do they support the customers when there's unusual things that need to be changed? So
yeah, I would add to that. In the best of times, when you get the integration between the two systems, ironed out during implementation, everything works. That is great until it doesn't work down the road, whether it's because of an upgrade or there was a change to one of the systems or some key was, modified. There's lots of variables that can cause an integration to stop working. And when that happens, it's sort of like all hands on deck. I mean, it's an emergency. You have to get that integration back up and functional. And, if that's 6 months or 12 months down the line, you don't have dedicated resources to ensuring that they can address problems quickly. And I think that's why it's so important to think through, okay, what happens if this integration was to go down? How quickly can I get somebody to address the issue? And, you know, the technical resources dedicated to an integration, you know, as Jacqueline mentioned before, you know, they're scarce. Sometimes it takes 6 months just because you need resources who have the, you know, the expertise to do them, to be able to, you know, to have the time frame to do it. And if something happens where you need immediate support, you know, you need to have that sort of thought through before it actually happens. So, you know, this ongoing support model and maintenance, you know, is something that you absolutely need to think through over time.
Yeah, I've worked for different solutions where, you know, they were in charge of the connectors. So if a connector was changed, then that was their department. But the integration that you built between those connectors on a do-it-yourself platform, that's your problem. And so you better know that that's your problem. They're only going to support what's written down in the contract. And then again, there are levels usually of support where, you know, if you're a payroll company and your integration goes down and people aren't going to get paid, that's a high priority. You need to know that that's a high priority for them as well. And just make sure that, again, you've got everything written out as to who's responsible for what. So you know who to call when certain things happen.
And the complication is that most of the vendors only, you know your side, but you don't necessarily know Workday, Oracle, success factors. You don't necessarily know the other side. So the support model, understanding how they're going to manage that is super key. It's not just that they have someone who's going to be able to understand just that integration piece. It's that they're keeping up to date on what's changing in all these different moving pieces.
All right. And make sure it's not just one person on your team that knows where all the bodies are buried. I've had that happen too.
And
well, it's impossible. It's impossible for one person to know all of these different
and having that, you know, information documented is so key for that knowledge transfer, because, you know, again, these integrations have to be supported over time. You know, you could have team turnover, you know, 3 times over before there's a problem that arises. And if they don't have sort of the blueprint to look back on, that becomes really problematic later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the tools to diagnose the failure point. What failed?
Yeah.
Because just because an integration may have gone through, but the data might have not gotten there. Something might have fallen, right? It doesn't mean the integration didn't work. It sent data, but did it send the correct data? Did you drop something? So having the right tools to detect failure points will also help when you understand who owns what, and you know what happened, and you can detect where the failure points are. You can really work in partnership with each other, as opposed to be getting on a phone and going, you know, doing that finger pointing, which no one feels good about.
Who needs to be notified when what happens and how, right?
Exactly.
Okay. This one here. A track record, obviously. NPS score is useful. References are helpful. Verifiable testimonials are helpful. I think some of you guys, you know, you have all that information in your brains, right? Because you've had customers that you've already put through various processes with various people. Is there a particular place you go, or something that's more important here than the other, or as far as vetting who you're going to go with?
So that's one of the things that we ask on every project review that we have on our site was, were there any integrations that were problematic? And the customer has the opportunity to, you know, sort of expand upon what that is. That is one way to check, is, you know, especially with, you know, if there's an SI that is handling integrations for you or in partnership with you, you can read our reviews, which we'll talk about, you know, speak to specifically integrations that were done. You know, I think, you know, going back to, in terms of track record, you know, having information documented on the actual integration itself, like a standard, you know, outline of what's included in this quote unquote standard integration, is going to illuminate like how real is this integration? Is this integration something that a salesperson talked about because there was some partnership that was done, 10 years ago, and it really, there's little there in terms of integration. It's more like a partnership between the two companies, or do they have documentation that shows very clearly what is and is not included in this quote unquote integration? So in terms of like, if you're looking for how to look at track records on things, I would say what documentation is available about what that integration includes. That's a really important thing to vet.
Right. Because they have it there. So it's real because they've written.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the verifiable testimonials are so key when you are looking, when a buyer is looking for, at your product. If you don't have case studies with company names and real names of the person who you're quoting in the case study, it doesn't look real. And as someone, again, who helps people buy software, I cannot tell you how many times a vendor will say, yeah, this vendor is our partner. We ask, well, could you put us in touch with someone who's using both products? And they can't, because no one is keeping track of who is using what and which connectors are being used with which products. So, arm your sales teams with enough information so when they're talking to a potential customer, you understand how that partnership really works, and have case studies. Case studies are the best way for a buyer or even a potential new partner, if you're looking to ink new partnerships, have case studies on what has worked and with real names and real companies.
Now, I have a note to put on that only because that works for enterprise. But I know I used to have really small clients wanting to talk to 3 references. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to harass my good clients unless your project is worth a certain amount. Of course, I think you guys mostly work with enterprise, so it's worth it. But
well, and yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, Raven Intel.com is a great place to look at. We have 2,000 reviews on our site. So if they're looking for 3 references, it's really easy to go out, and reviews are a very quick way to vet what's real and what's not. So I would just say, that's a definite stopgap. And rather than talk with 3 people, look at 2,000 references. They're available on our review site as well.
Right. So third party is, because you don't have any skin in the game with any of them in particular. So
that's right.
I can see that. Yeah.
Jacqueline, just real quick on that last point you made, and hello, by the way.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hey. So track record, as far as the vendors go, there are some vendors that are that become known for that point about, basically they insinuate that they integrate with everything. And it's basically, they're just trying not to lose any opportunity, right? They're just trying to cover as much market share as they can. But every time you dig deep into each of those, you realize that it's kind of vaporware. Either the integration doesn't exist, it might have existed a long time ago, or it's like such a slimmed down amount of data that it really provides no value. So you just have to be careful about, or as a buyer, you have to be careful about, just assuming that if it's a logo on a PowerPoint, that it's actually something that exists.
Yes, that is true. I see logos all over the place just thrown up there because you can get it off of Google and it doesn't mean anything. So,
and one thing I just want to add to that too,
sure.
During the selection process for software, I think the buyer team, looks at integrations, like check the box. Oh, they're integrated to X. Perfect. And, I think by the time then that they make a decision and yes, we're going ahead with this, it's really the project team that then has to deal with vetting. Okay, how real was this integration or interface, or, again, going back to the standard terminology. And I think, it really behooves vendors to provide that information up front about, what is included with integrations, but put it in lay terms that a project team can understand. Because when we say documentation, sometimes it's so detailed, the project team's like, ugh, I don't know what this means. I'll give it to my IT person. But
Mhm.
you know, if the vendor can put it into very, easy to understand terms with, defining what it is, what fields are the common keys, how many fields are passed back and forth, all of those type of things that I think, are the project or selection team can understand. I mean, that is where the gap and sort of the assumptions are made that I think you could avoid a lot of that miscommunication up front with good documentation that's put into lay terms during the sales process.
Absolutely agree with you. And terminology is a problem in a lot of these conversations, because I've been on conversations with people that have been in the industry for decades, and they still interchangeably use API and integration and connector, and they don't realize that they're not even speaking the same language, and so verify you understand that what we're saying is that we're going to take care of the connector, which is this and all that. You got to make absolutely sure, because if we assume, you know what that means, it does not work.
Yes.
So this next one is about aligning your pricing structure and your plans for growth with your vendor partner. So, even though you got to look ahead, so something that works for you in the urgency of today may not be able to scale along with you. So I don't know if that makes sense. You guys get what I'm asking there on that one?
It is exactly what we at HRchitect are going through right now and looking at. As an implementer of these solutions, we are looking at how do we price building these integrations, because it is expensive to build. And then, of course, we want to tie a support package, right, to get some reoccurring revenue. But then, the client's also paying for the vendor product, and the vendor was supposed to have some tools to help with it. And then they look at us like, why do we have to pay you if the vendor said that it was standard? So when you have partners, when you have SIs, when you're, creating these things, you really have to think about how not just scalable, how sustainable is that pricing? Like, how realistic is it to be building these things, and what is it going to cost down the road as well? It's something we are absolutely wrestling with as an SI right now. We do not have this solved, and it looks like there's like as many flavors as Baskin Robbins. So yeah, this is a challenge.
And in terms of pricing too, you want to understand, like, in the provisioning, sometimes in integration, you have to purchase an extra seat license for that integration, or, and some vendors actually charge like pass-through integration costs. So you want to make sure, like, those, like, is there a cost to the integration? Because sometimes, there's a standard integration, but you end up paying for the transfer of data, or you end up paying for license fees that you didn't bank on, thinking that, oh, because it's standard, it's free. That also you can't assume there.
Right. Yeah, and access to open the APIs, even, right? That I've seen companies charge for that. Like, oh, you want access to your data? That's going to be another XYZ.
Integration is free, but the data will cost you extra.
Yeah, that transparency is just not there in the market yet. I will tell you, I think this is also about transparency and pricing, like Bonnie said, because it is somewhat hidden often that, the one-time cost to set up the integration versus the monthly cost to keep it running sometimes doesn't even come up until you're in the final work order, right, with the client. So once you figure out what your pricing structure should be and how you can sustain it, I just encourage vendors to please think about the transparency, because there's a trust building factor with your customers and other vendor partners. And the more you can be transparent about these things, the better that relationship will be.
And I know that I actually was in in the past, I was in competitive bids with myself, where, the two payroll companies, let's say, were in competition, but I was the source of the integration for both. And so I would give them the same exact price because it was basically the same integration, but one of them would quote a much lower because they absorb most or all of it to get the business. So, but the other company wouldn't absorb any of it. So, that's something that's going to affect you in the end too, whether you're going to absorb all or some of it or none of it, in terms of the integration itself. Because they don't like it when you add that on at the last minute. Oh, by the way, you're paying $6,000 for your software. It's going to cost you $20,000 for the integration, and it's frowned upon. Let me see. This is kind of I guess, a little bit of a repeat, or could be. What are their terms and conditions, rights and responsibilities? And what happens when things go wrong? You need to read these, right, people?
Yes.
Yeah. Contracting and not only terms and conditions and rights to information, rights to access the other side's information. So, when your vendor partner is doing a release, you can have access to that and know how it impacts you, right? It is a partnership. And I think the terms and conditions tend, I've been looking at a lot lately because we've been inking a lot of new partnerships, and they're all very protective. It's all about protecting my assets, not about how do I share information and keep each other informed in a way where we can both be successful, because that is really a definition of a partnership.
Mhm.
And I think that we have a long way to go in the vendor community in thinking of it that way, because we kind of have a scarcity mindset where we want to keep all of our resources to ourselves and all of our knowledge to ourselves, as opposed to sharing too much. So I just encourage folks to be a little more open-minded about really what those agreements look like, what you're going to allow your partners to have access to, how you're going to keep your partners informed, because the better the better the relationship between you and your partners, the more successful you will be.
Mhm.
And, I think understanding too, so what happens when if and when you leave the box that's defined in terms of the integration? So what happens when you want to bring additional custom fields that weren't included? So how would that be built? So even understanding okay, so it seems like this is what we need today, but if it isn't, is that how can I get resources? What's the cost of those resources? Is it a fixed fee? Is it time and materials? I mean, there's, it can either be fairly inexpensive to go out of scope, or all of a sudden, like Jacqueline said in the beginning of the call, it could be 6 months and $10,000 that you weren't really accounting for initially.
Mhm.
And I think we're going to talk about security and maybe in a couple other slides, but one of the key things as you're looking through the terms and conditions is to be thinking about data privacy. And that landscape is constantly changing. We don't necessarily think about it at the heightened way that in the US but it's thought about in a lot of other countries. But we really need to make sure that you're thinking about data that is in your system and where it's going and who it's going to, and ensure that you can respond to questions, because our customers, the clients, are going to want to make sure that their employee data or their applicant data is secure, and that they're able to comply with all the different responsibilities that they have under GDPR or other data privacy laws. So very important.
Yeah, and it is gonna spread. Right.
It already is spreading.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
got lots of new laws popping up.
We're at 10:30, but I'm going to hit this last slide, which is the security one.
I knew that was coming up.
Yeah, I know. That's all right. I think most of the vendors out there are data processors and not data controllers that I'm familiar with. So that kind of gets them out of the, or over the GDPR thing. They need SOC 2. A lot of it's the same stuff, the same minimals. Is there anything new? You said there was some new stuff coming out that is going to hit us?
Well, it's around the laws expanding, right? So we have the California law. We've started to see other laws coming in place in lots of different states within the US, other countries adding other laws. So I think GDPR is still the standard around data privacy, but very much so. I think we haven't seen the cases come through. We were starting to see cases come through on employee rights to data. I applied for a job, and then you sent my data to this background check vendor, and you sent it, then you sent it over to this person for an assessment, and you sent it here, and I want my data erased. I'm in the EU, and I want my data erased, and I want to make sure that it's erased from everything. And client doesn't even know where that data went, and they don't have integrations in place that could actually erase the data. And so that whole place, I think we would have started to see more cases pop up, but then COVID hit. So everybody got distracted with COVID. So now we're starting to see some of those cases and filings start to pop up again, complaints. And so I think we'll see a heightened focus on those things again, especially around if you're in the recruiting applicant type of space, talent acquisition.
Yeah. I was on a call last week and about this sort of topic, and what I see is there's a conflict between the laws that are coming out.
There are,
so we've got a ways to go. Like, which one do you toggle the switch on? Like, well, in this case, we're going to go with the GDPR. In this case, we're going to care more about OFCCP compliance.
Yeah, there is definitely a conflict between those two laws of how long you have to keep data versus what you need to. And so, yeah, we've done Enavrio, we've done a lot of work around helping clients navigate how do you figure out which law trumps which law, and how do you justify that, and how do you determine when you retain and when you don't. And it gets extremely complicated when we talk about integrations, because you have to look at why you're keeping the data and where it's stored and what the purpose is. And so
and how long, and is it encrypted, and
yes.
Yeah.
And what type of data is it? And yeah.
Okay.
I could talk for hours about that piece.
I knew I was like pulling the pin and walking away, like, go ahead. So that is the last of our slides. So I guess I'll open it up to some questions and interaction. If anybody has any input, I would prefer that the vendors don't try to pitch in this part of the session. You'll get your chance later in the day. But if there are any, people that are outside the integration vendors, happy to take some feedback, questions, or calls. I have not been paying attention up to now, so stop sharing this and take a look and see if there's any questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'd put one in the chat there, this word, in terms of some of the ISVs that are on the line here or watching the recording. If they've already done their own integrations internally and they're like, you know what, we need to scale faster or whatever, what's a good approach to start evaluating their options, of course, besides coming to this wonderful event? What have you seen worked, out there with ISPs are looking to partner or collaborate with some of these iPaaS type solutions?
Which one of you ladies wants to take that one? Nobody? Well, I'll just say that there's no one solution. In any case, you're always going to be working with multiple solutions, I think, depending on, because your clients aren't all exactly the same. There might be some cases where the vendor wants to do them internally, and then other cases where they absolutely don't want to touch it with somebody else's 10-foot pole. So there's no one choice to be made, I guess is what I'm saying, in terms of who you're going to work with.
Go ahead, Brenda. You go, Brenda.
Start with the people that are here. So you've got some great vendors that are going to be talking later today. Start with them and start asking questions and start understanding the landscape, because there is a lot to understand and uncover. And to Katrina's point earlier, most of us don't understand all the lingo or know exactly, but the more you start asking those questions, you'll start uncovering and getting to what you need and understand all the different options. It would be really nice if there was a dictionary somewhere that explained all that and outlined all of this. It isn't something that's just out there that explains all the variables.
Yeah, and I was going to take that in a little different direction, but it's when you talk to each other, it really all depends on how you all expose your data and what the best way is to get at it and how best to build those, because each of you exposes your data in different ways and your data is formatted in different ways. So Katrina's one size can't fit all, right? Because not every HCM vendor has their data in exactly the same format and expose it in the exact same way. If you did, it would make our lives incredibly easier.
And the processes too, right? It's not just about the data, it's about what needs to actually happen with through the whole process.
Yeah.
Not to answer this in the context of an iPass necessarily, but as a service provider that's kind of vetted these situations where an ISV is looking to outsource that piece of the puzzle, like we want to know that, number one, we're not going to be a guinea pig and we're not going to have to like figure this out on your behalf. But we also don't want the ecosystem so built out that there's not an opportunity. So it's going to be that middle ground where we know we can make an impact, but we know that you've given a substantial amount of thought to, what the mechanisms are going to be for us executing on those. So.
Right. Let me see what other questions we have.
Yeah, it looks like Dustin has a question. What role would you prefer to play with regard to integrations? In other words, do you like to own the ISV integration, or do you prefer the ISV keeps it? I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'll let you interpret it. or Dustin, you're welcome to jump in and further explain it.
Oh, Dustin, we cannot hear you for some reason, or at least I can't hear him.
Yeah.
Which is weird because you don't.
Phone,
oh, okay.
If I come off video, though, I violate all your branding rules. So I was staying off. Essentially, if there's integrations between an ISV that a customer wants to use, I'm thinking about the partners in the middle that are helping advise, implement, whatever. Do you prefer that the vendor deals with all of the integration stuff, all the issues on our side, all the configuration is on our side? Or do you actually like to own some of that, as in you can control and manipulate the integration, which we'd have to set you up for? But that's the heart of the question. Hopefully that makes sense.
Dustin, are you saying you as the client, or do you like to own it, you as the vendor?
I mean, you, Brenda, do you like to own the integration that we might have with a client?
Okay.
Like, do you like to the details and work on it, or would you prefer that the software vendor deals with it all and you could push all of the issues over to the vendor?
Yeah, good question. So from our standpoint, we like it. We like when we have problems because it brings us revenue, right? Our consultants are out there working with customers and helping support any of the integration issues, making customizations, adjust it. I think the clients themselves would prefer it if everything was just easy, right? And the integrations were simple and the vendor took care of everything and they could quickly call the vendor and get the support they needed. So that's
right,
my
which
my
vendor
take
though, right?
One
there's
the
two
main vendor.
vendors.
So if I have an integration where BetterWorks says I have a standard integration to SuccessFactors, they want to be able to call BetterWorks and BetterWorks to solve all of it. And that's where we know that's where the challenge comes in, right? Because BetterWorks, you probably only really know BetterWorks to mostly, right? And so that's where Enavrio actually steps in a lot, because we're able to work with BetterWorks and bring in that success factors expert to help work through those issues.
So having a
Thank you.
support person, you've got the one throat to choke basically too, right? Because you can, I go to Brenda and Brenda solves my issues with the other sides,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Or Bonnie or Jacqueline.
Yeah, we go back and forth with that all the time, as to who should own what. And I think oftentimes our position is we want to own like the main HCM. We want to own the integration that, that are in the main HCM platform we're supporting, like Ceridian, UKG, Workday, whatever. And the things we integrate out to, we would love that vendor to own more of that integration, because that's a side business for us. It's not like our core business. And we can't have experts in all of those other platforms. So we wrestle with this on a regular basis, Dustin, because, our core business is the core HCM, is the HRMS vendor, not every BetterWorks that's out there. So yeah, we wrestle with that a lot.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
Okay. I've heard vendors say that's a standard extra. Is that from Ward?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of covered in the fact that you need to know what's in the standard and what's not in the standard, and when it is standard, when it's not standard, and
and who's
depending on
paying
what,
for it.
yeah, who's paying for it, how long it'll take, all that. Anybody else have any questions, or this is an open half an hour? Let me think. Jeremy jumped in, and I didn't think you were going to make it, but I appreciate you showing up.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know if I could get out of that meeting. So thank you for inviting me.
No, I appreciate you coming and offering
Yeah.
your opinions for sure.
I would make Katrina, I didn't
Sure.
answer that last question. I did want to make a quick point on it. You kind of just touched on it. It really has to do with what that baseline integration includes. If it's, extremely basic, we're going to have clients that are consistently asking for us to, either plead with the vendor to add information to it, or to see if we can actually customize it ourselves. So really that's the determinant, to answer Dustin's question for us anyways, as to whether or not, we want to be in the middle. If it's robust enough, then I'd much rather just set it and forget it. But if every time we're doing a talent acquisition integration, it only includes 5, data points for that candidate moving over to an HR system, then obviously we're going to keep, trying to enhance it. So it's really about how robust is it out of the box.
Right. And again, I think that all comes back to the fact that there's not one solution that's the answer for everybody for every situation. So it depends on what your needs are, what you're connecting, what fields are required versus what's, what you've customized. You need to do your due diligence and understand that what you think you're getting is what you're getting, that you're getting what you need, not getting what you don't need. That it's all custom matching, really, as far as, who your best match is in the situation. And the same thing when you're deciding on vendors, individual vendors, right? There's no one solution that works for everybody.
So I got a question for the panel. Back at, when was that? Pre-COVID, Workday came into the HR Tech Expo in St. Paul and did a briefing, and they announced they just rolled out their open API. So there's one example. You don't have to pick on Workday, but they're fun for that. Open API, does that solve all the issues? Everybody can just connect to that, or is that just a misleading marketing thing that means you still got a lot of work to do? Any thoughts on that?
It doesn't mean all your solutions or all your problems are solved. I can say that for sure.
Well, I mean, there's been a movement for that, but outside of like Greenhouse or something, I haven't really heard much people saying, "Oh, yeah, they have an open API. It was easy to connect," or one of the iPasses already is connected to their open API. So why would we just try to even do it ourselves? I don't know. I'm just wondering if that is the future, or do you see that being just a temporary kind of?
It doesn't solve all the integration needs, but it helps to understand the scope of what you have to do, what's built in that open API versus what's missing. And it really helps an SI to scope out what the work effort really is going to be. It's, again, that's transparency, right? So I see what you do, what you expose. Now I can figure out what's not included in that. And now how do we need to build something to, include what's missing? So while it definitely helps in the transparency, it's not a be all end all.
Yeah.
Solution.
OpenAI doesn't mean, or Open API doesn't mean all the fields are available in, and when I first entered the market, I was like, why don't we just have one API that gives everybody everything? And it just seemed like, but that's not how it works.
Just because it's open does not mean it's magic.
Right.
It's still, it takes a layer out of the effort needed to create all the hooks. Those hooks still need to be, developed and maintained over time. And, one of the things we didn't talk specifically about was, this idea of data cleanliness. And that is a huge issue, especially in an implementation where it's great that you can connect two systems that are passing back and forth garbage data. So that helps nobody. And I think, this idea of just determining, okay, so it's great that we can connect this, but, does data need to be normalized? Is it good data? All of those things go into, I think, the scoping and the implementation effort around an implementation. It's just not, just because you have an integration built doesn't mean it's magically going to, have the impact that you need it to in terms of the information.
Very true.
For me, it would be fascinating to find out, for those vendors who did go the open API route, what that meant for them, like holistically, as far as who attempted to use it, how many times they decided that maybe wasn't the best path, and then they started creating their own internal tools. Like I've seen that with one large vendor, but I've only seen like my snippet of their world. So I'd be curious to know if that ended up, if they look at that right now, because it's still out there, you can still get to their, their whole library. Was that a good business decision for them? Did it, cause more problems than it solved? That's really, because I only see it from my lens, so I'd be curious.
That Bonnie's next project. Don't you do research projects like that get to the heart of things?
It's more on an individual project in terms of the integration that we'll look at. We don't look at specifically an entire, we look at it mostly from a point in time customer
Individual. Oh, okay.
That might be something good to get Stacey Harris involved with her survey. And another interesting question, data point for that survey.
Okay. Yeah, she comes up with some great stuff.
Yeah.
Well, to Jeremy's point, I think I'd be surprised if most of them stuck with that because of the limitations. It sounds good on the surface. That's what I'm kind of trying to dig a little. The ugly part, it's like, yeah, this is going to be easy. And then later they're like, oh crap, what do we do? And then they're, the prices go up because it's like somebody's got to do it, do the custom or pay extra to a third party to make the connections. Even I imagine it will be interesting to hear from the iPass providers later today. They have the same issues, I guess, right? So if they're connected, no matter what connections they have, they're probably going to have to customize it over time. But that's a benefit to the customer, like Katrina's point. Why don't they just grab all the fields? Well, what are all the fields? Right?
What about when they change them?
Depends on the customer. They may add their own and it's not in the API. Well, now what do you do? Well,
yeah,
that's where these great people like Brenda and Jacqueline that do these projects, they got the answers, but it'll cost you a little.
It'll cost you.
yes.
I mean, the reality is there is not there is not a single HCM vendor on the market that can do everything for everyone. So we have to live in an integration world. We do. I mean, it's not going to go away anytime soon. I don't even think it'll go away in my career lifetime. So, I think it behooves all of us to figure out how to do it better, because it's needed. There, minimally, we typically see 4 or 5 different applications in a typical mid-market organization. Enterprise, it's larger.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's here to stay. So I think the vendor community, if we could just figure this out and make it a little easier for all of us, I think the experience for our customers, for ourselves, for our people who have to manage it, that work for us, I think would enhance the whole experience.
Well, HR Open Standards has been trying to get everybody to use the same format. They've been working on that project for like 12 years or something.
Yeah.
And I mean, as a end user, it would be fantastic.
Yeah.
As an integration provider, I'd be like, no.
Right.
So I think it's gotten a lot easier. There's some great, we have some great vendors coming on this afternoon, or today and this afternoon. And integrations has come a long way. There's a lot of, I don't know what they call them, recipes or templates or whatever they call them, that are, get you, further down the road right from the get-go, as opposed to starting from scratch every time.
Yeah.
So it has come a long way, and these vendors are going to be able to tell you about how they've, worked to become better and good solution providers for the various organizations that are out there, and the vendors that need to
And I think
partner with them.
Jeremy said something about maybe data transformation or something like that. And the next session, we're going to hear about Workato and some of the things that they're doing along with Harbinger to help customers do that, get the data ready either for initial migration or the integrations and so forth. And perhaps, building internal workflows or data transformation to get it started, and also to keep it, I think, Jacqueline, you mentioned, maintainable, right? Something that
Mm-hmm.
that can, hopefully the technology can do it for them, so that the people aren't trying to, constantly cross connect the data points that leads to errors, and then you lose all the value. So it's data transformation is also a huge part of the future, no doubt.
Yeah, well, look what's happened with AI. So Lord knows what's going to happen with integrations over the next year, right? So.
Yeah, it's ladies, and Katrina included as the session leader and MC for the day. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and dishing a little bit. I was hoping to get a little uglier there, but we'll have the sidebar chats. Maybe come to the last session. We'll turn off the recording and really let it fly.
Yes, thank you very much, ladies. Great information, and